Now we go to a man half Fred Harris's age, who all these years later is trying to pick up where the Kerner Commission left off. Cory Booker was only 32 years old in 2002 when he first ran as a reform candidate for mayor of Newark, New Jersey.
I can't even see you. I'm talking to a screen, but I'll just let you know I'm running for mayor.
His campaign was documented by the Oscar-nominated film Street Fight.
Newark faces real challenges. We have a murder rate that's twice the Bronx. We have almost a third of our people living below the poverty line, and we graduate only about 40% of our kids from high school. There's no excuse for this. This city can be doing so much better for the people that live here.
Booker ran against a powerful and popular, though corrupt, incumbent. Opponents said this Rhodes Scholar, Stanford football star, and Yale Law School graduate wasn't black enough, called him a pawn of white society trying to take over Newark. Booker lost. But 4 years later, he came back again to win. The city he took over was one of the most dysfunctional and dangerous in America. Poverty rates, unemployment, and crime all higher than the national average, while education and quality of life standards remain dismally low.
What are you doing out there late?
But Cory Booker had long been driven to save Newark. His commitment began over a decade ago when he left the comfortable suburbs to move into the city's notorious Brick Towers housing project. He stayed there 8 years, battling an entrenched bureaucracy and challenging thousands of tenants to fight for better living conditions. As mayor, Booker has defied liberals and conservatives alike with innovations in every department of city government. After the brutal murders of 3 young people last year, his changes in the police department have resulted in Newark's longest stretch without a murder since before the 1967 riots. I talked with Mayor Booker in his office earlier this week. Do people in Newark even talk about the Kerner Commission, even talk about the riots of 1967? Do they remember them?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, there is a generational divide. I mean, I was born after the Civil Rights Movement. I never saw Martin Luther King alive. But there's still a scar here in the city of Newark, and it's never been talked about, I think, to the point where we can really start healing. If they're saying the Newark riots, a lot of people understand that the pain was the initial explosion of anger and alienation. But after that, the response, sending in the National Guard troops, a lot of violence was carried out and perpetrated by those who were allegedly coming here to protect residents. There were thousands of rounds of bullets that the National Guard couldn't account for as they were sweeping through, firing indiscriminately into housing projects. People here will still tell me, especially around the anniversary of the riots, about having to sleep on the floor, talking about people that were murdered or killed by bullets coming through their window, that were being shot by friendly fire. So it was this time that there is a lot of pain, and I still think we as a city, we as a culture, have to heal.
Most people don't know that up until the riots, Newark was run by the mob, along with a corrupt Democratic administration.
Absolutely.
In politics.
And people don't realize that the overt racism that was being exacted on the population here, the good intentions of the federal government sending large block grants to the city that were then doled out in corrupt ways, really started to aggravate the frustrations of residents of this city that really felt that the judicial system was not a place they could go for justice. The government was not a place that they could go for justice. They were being locked out of job opportunities. It began a sense, which is the most toxic element in American society then and now, there began to be a sense of hopelessness about that the system was not making a space for their cries for justice.
To what extent is race still casting a pall over what you're trying to do here?
It concerns me, especially now, that a new generation of African Americans are coming to the fore. And I hear reporters ask me all the time that you are a part of a generation of blacks who's creating a race-transcending society. And that bothers me.
Why?
Well, I don't want us to be an America that is sanitized, homogenized, deodorized, as a friend of mine says, and forgets about race. The richness of America is that we are diverse. We're not Sweden. We're not Norway. We are a great American experiment. And as soon as we start trying to forget race or turn our back on race, number one, we don't confront the real racial realities that still persist. But number two is we miss the great, delicious opportunities that exist in America and nowhere else. So I don't want to be a race transcending leader. I want to be deeply understood as a man, as an African American, as a Christian, all that I am. But ultimately, it's a portal to punch through to a deeper, more textured, more nuanced understanding of the beauty and the brilliance of America. So that involves a difficult conversation, not a soundbite.
I hear what you're saying, but what do these, I brought some statistics from this week's Washington Post, and I'd like to know what you think about these. The average black person in America is 447% more likely to be imprisoned than the average white person, and 521% more likely to be murdered. Blacks earn 60% to the dollar compared with whites who have the same educational levels and marital status. And because of long-standing patterns of inheritance, blacks and whites begin life with substantial disparities in family wealth. That's this week's Washington Post. What do these findings say to you?
Well, I think that anybody who believes in America, who believes in justice, who believes in what we stand for, has to find those statistics nauseating and realize that we as a country are not complete yet. That this is not in many ways a nation that's seeking a black justice or seeking a white justice. We profess certain values. Our children pledge it every single day that we will be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
But these realities defy that.
Exactly. So what's the challenge to my generation? And that's really where I come back to is, we can have the courage to deplore the situation, but that's not going to heal it. I do not believe, I'm not going to have the same conversation my father has now. And I watched him. He sat with me.
He's how old?
He's now in his early 70s.
And what was that conversation?
My dad, who's the most optimistic guy, came up to Newark one day and he said, my father was born to a single parent. He said, I couldn't afford to be poor. I was just P.O., couldn't afford the other two letters. I was a poor boy from North Carolina, born to a single mother in a viciously segregated town. And to have my dad who say, here we are, decades later, and I still see kids in a viciously segregated world, still see kids growing up in poverty. But what I worry about is that their life chances are even worse than mine were growing up in the 1930s and 40s.
Well, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that. I mean, right here, 20 years ago, the birth rate among the single women, fatherless families was very big out here. And now, according to statistics today, nearly 70% of children in Newark are born out of wedlock. Can you ever deal with these issues unless you start with breaking that cycle?
Well, if you look at single mothers, and I love this analysis because there's been a lot of studies on the increase in unwed mothers, which I think is not a good thing for our nation. But as much as there's an increase in the black community, the proportion of unwed mothers between black and white has stayed the same. So it may have increased, it's actually increased in both. So a lot of these issues, and I often say that if you want to take the temperature of America and where we are as evolving as a country, it's good to dip into the Latino community, the black community, because you get a clarity of the urgencies that our nation still faces. But that does not mean that these aren't real issues within the white community or in America as general.
What's the most stubborn reality that you face here in Newark?
It is a spiritual crisis of people not believing in the greatness of who we are. And I know in my experience, and I've dealt with some of the most difficult situations our country has ever seen, if you take away options for people or where they don't believe, rightfully or wrongfully, that there's hope for their lives in the pathways in which we as Americans view as the righteous path, they're going to stray. People are going to stray from that path where they feel they have limited choices. I mean, take for example a 15-year-old kid, and I see this, who's growing up in a household with perhaps their parents are not present, and they are not getting the kind of education available in their schools. And we have some very challenged educational institutions in our nation, and they make a mistake, and instead of smoking marijuana, are caught with a significant amount. And they don't have pretrial interventions available to them. They don't have lawyers to come and help them out. And they get thrown in jail. They come out maybe weeks later, and now they have a criminal conviction. They have a criminal conviction. They have no education, formal education. They have nobody there to mentor them. All these things begin to mount up to them, and they realize I have no other option, or believe that they have no other option than to continue in the drug trade, which is so easy and right there.
It's an economic engine for them that gives them respect,
they are making
dignity.
What one might say in the rawest form, and I don't believe it, I think it's a spiritual deficit, but in the rawest form they might say that this is a rational economic decision that they're making. But here is America, and what is our response to that? We can line up and deplore it, We can say that we need to build more prisons and hold these criminals, or we can say let's end this madness and look at practical policy decisions that we can make.
Such as?
We can make a great investment in an alternative to detention program that statistically is proven through longitudinal studies to reduce recidivism by 60, 70%. But we don't invest in those programs on the front end.
Because of blackness, race?
I don't think it's as simplistic as that. You have to understand, race now is ground into a complicated crucible with poverty and so many other issues, geographic dislocation, you name it. What we have to realize is we can get caught up as pundits sitting there talking about sound bites and race, which is so not helpful. Or we can say, hey, black, white, or whatever, let's change policy to react to the concerns that we have. My passion, my life is not about trying to create justice for one group over another group. It's to understand that we are one nation. We're in this together. We're either going to race together to the bottom or we're going to rise together to the top.
But you're dealing with the reality right here in Newark.
Yeah.
And that is the statistics, the facts, the figures are all
right, but
devastating.
But that's the attitude I'm competing against, where people say that we face this leviathan of a problem that's so implacable that we can't deal with it. Cory, and I've heard this so much, we're 40 years where we've been dealing with these problems. I have people, the most sincere individuals, come to me and tell me, oh, Mayor, murder, it's going up all over the country. There's nothing you can do about it. This year, it's even going up in New York City. What can you do about it? Well, here we are year to date. We're down 70% on murders because me and a group of very committed grassroots activists and police decided we were going to choose a different way. We have a choice as Americans. We can continue to talk about problems, and I will not have the same conversation when I'm 70-something years old with my child. We are going to shut up in this city and fight.
So what's the strategy? I think this is what I've got a nationwide audience all over the country listening to the mayor of Newark. What is the new strategy? It's not civil rights legislation. We did that in the 60s. Billions of dollars have been poured into the cities, billions right here in Newark. What is the strategy that you think people living in urban areas all over this country should follow to deal with these intractable, real, grim facts on the ground?
I say simply this. Don't look at government to do it. Don't look at somebody else. Look in the mirror and ask yourself, I benefit from this nation. I benefit from incredible sacrifices. What am I willing to do different this year to make a difference in the problems in America?
You're saying that to these black kids who are going to being arrested and being sent to prison?
Absolutely, and I've sat with those kids that you're talking about at this point. I've sat with young people as a mentor and looked them in the eye. It's your life, it's your destiny, you choose. But I'm telling you this right now, King again said it so much more eloquently. It's not the vitriolic words and the violent actions of the evil people that threaten us as a nation. It's the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And we as Americans have to understand that change will never roll in on the wheels of inevitability. It necessitates sacrifice and struggle by true warriors.
Is that money? Do you need more money?
There's no simple answer, and that's the knee-jerk reaction, to spend more money. Well, you know what? I can show you places in the city of Newark where we're doing more with less, simply because we have good people stepping forward and saying, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore in my nation, in my community, on my block. They're doing mentoring programs. You have grassroots leaders, young black men starting organizations like Prodigal Sons and Daughters here in the city of Newark, welcoming people back to the community. Because if you are a Christian, that's one of the seminal stories. If somebody's coming back from doing wrong, you don't just point a finger at them and say, bad, bad, bad for the rest of your life. You get up and you embrace them and you help them and you put them back. And I see people in our grassroots doing that. I hear groups like Stop Shooting, young black men who just said they're tired of seeing what's going on in their communities. And they reach out and they mentor and they work with people. The power of our country always has never been the leadership. Please, the civil rights movement was done by young kids, young people that we will never know their names, that made this country change.
I'm struck that you've been emphasizing so-called quality of life issues. Picking up the litter on the street. I've read that you'll get angry at somebody in the car ahead of you who throws wrappers out on the
I'll stop, put my lights on, pull them over, and give them their trash back, because it's all about the spirit. It all comes down to a spiritual transformation. And if your city looks messy, we have a lot of challenges with that in Newark, with litter and illegal dumping. If you're unkempt, it's all about self-respect. It's all about the spirit. And it all starts with how you feel about yourself and what you know about yourself. I'm not saying, I ran to become mayor of the city of Newark because I wanted to make policy changes, and we're doing it. We're getting ex-offenders hired by going out and talking to companies and saying, hey, if we train them, if we give them soft skills, if we help these men to understand who they really are, will you hire them? And companies are stepping up and doing it. We're creating incentives to help them, free legal services to help our brothers and sisters coming home. So we're making clear policy changes. But at the end of the day, I need that law firm, like the one in the city of Newark, who's willing to give those free legal services. I need those companies who understand that you can do good and do well at the same time. I need the churches who are willing to run some of the programs.
But you need jobs too, don't you?
Yeah, but the thing is, if you reimagine your economy,
How? How so?
Oh, there's so many ways. Look, we have to save inner city buildings like the city of Newark. We're hemorrhaging energy. Nobody's weatherized the city of Newark. Nobody's looked at insulation. So all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, you could save money, millions of dollars for government, for schools, for businesses if you weatherize, if you insulate. And all of a sudden you realize, wait, you've created a business model right there that you can create businesses and therefore jobs right here in the city of Newark running around and doing these things. If you reimagine your economy and realize and go to people and say, wait a minute, you've got a law here that makes no sense whatsoever preventing young black men who have criminal convictions from getting jobs in the port area. Why are you denying them?
In the port area?
In the port area. Or let me give you a worse. I had a guy that came to my open office hours who couldn't get a taxi license because 20 years earlier he had a criminal conviction. He wanted to be an entrepreneur, but yet government was restricting his ability to get a license because of 20 years ago. Every state in America has these nonsensical laws that undermine the potential of individuals. There's so many things that we can do that are sound, rational policy that are not right and not left, not Democrat, not Republican, that are American in my opinion, that we all can agree on, but we're just not doing it. And any elected leader like me is betraying their office if they run for office and they sit in office and say government's going to do for you. What I'm looking for in leadership, whether it's my president, whether it's my governor, whether it's my mayor, I want leaders that are going to ask more from America.
We've seen the specter of race intrude into the presidential race. And I know you experienced it when you were running because some people said, some blacks said you weren't black enough to be mayor of a basically black city. How is race playing out in your life here now?
I think that's the frustrating thing for me often is the dialogue I hear on the news, in the media is very different than the dialogue for real Americans on their everyday lives. You know, I spent a lot of years of my life, did my undergraduate studying urban issues. I did my master's degree studying that. In law school, my focus was all these issues. And I could sit here and give you a treatise on the causal factors of racial disparities. But at some point, I think we need to start having a conversation about what are we going to do to solve it. What I'm trying to say is that you can get so caught up in looking for blame. Who's to blame? Is it society's to blame? Is it white folks to blame? Is it the prisoner himself to blame? But at some point in America, we're going to have to get beyond blame and start accepting responsibility. So again, I have to say, I'm not that old, but from
How old are you now?
38 years old. But I'm already getting fatigued with the conversation and feeling that there's a dearth of action. That it may be in vogue right now because of this presidential election to talk about race and to study and to flip it over. But at the end of the day, is it going to motivate action? We've had the courage to deplore the reality in which we live. But we showed the equal courage to do something about it. Not wait, not point a finger, not sit and have debates about a divided America, but to get into the trenches, to roll up your sleeves, to do the hard, difficult work it takes to manifest the greatness of this nation. America was born out of collective sacrifice, out of a lot of fights and a lot of struggles. And here our generation of living Americans has to decide what they're going to do. If they're going to sit back and just let this be a spectator sport, then we will devolve in the same way the great Roman Empire did. But if you're willing to get up and continue the fight, to continue the struggle, to understand that we are not a nation who has manifested their ideals, that when our children pledge allegiance to that flag, whether they're in Newark, New Jersey, or Beverly Hills, those kids are saying words, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, that are aspirational. We haven't achieved that. And therefore, this generation has to manifest the same struggle that my parents' generation did and my parents' generation did.
But the founding fathers who proclaimed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as our ultimate values also nurtured slavery in the cradle of liberty.
Absolutely. And I love that civil rights leader that said constitute. I can't say the full word. I can only say 2/5 or 3/5 of the word because Americans were judged, black Americans or Americans were judged in that fraction. That in our very Declaration of Independence, Native Americans are referred to as savages. Obviously, there is racial divisiveness, degradation that seeped into the very founding of our nation. But the beauty of America is that the people of this country, black and white and Jewish and Quaker, saw within this nascent nation, saw within it the very manifestation of the divine, and helped this country overcome itself, its limitations and its divisions, and created a nation in which I'm proud of, but ultimately which I know is not complete yet. If you realize that, what are you doing about it? If that's the final question people should ask. What am I doing to deserve this country? I'm an American. That comes with it obligations. We have the Statue of Liberty on one side. I think we should build another statue in this country called the Statue of Obligation, the Statue of Responsibility. And people should understand that by the very nature, people are fighting to become citizens of the United States of America, willing to do whatever it takes, but we're taking for granted what that legacy means.
I've watched you since your first race, which you lost. I've watched you on the city council. I know that you're trying to move us into a new direction. How do you adjust to not being able to do all the important things you want to do?
I'm stubborn, and I made a decision in my life what I'm willing to die for, what I'm willing to live for, and I've maybe call it an arrogance to believe that I live in a time where me and my team members and my community can do anything. And I've often been criticized for it. I've often been told I'm unrealistic, but I think this country was formed on unrealistic ideals.
You've also been the subject of death threats.
I've been subject of death threats. I've seen my share of violence in my days.
A young man died in your arms, didn't he?
I had a tragic situation where a kid was shot and fell backwards into my arms, and I held him as he, in vainly trying to stop the blood. You have a choice to make every day. Will you will you do everything you can, despite the circumstances, to generate love and light, or will you give in to the darkness around you? And I believe that in this city that I love, I've been able to connect to so many people that you will never read about or see on TV. Not people who are involved in debates about race on TV, not people who are pointing fingers, but you see these neighborhood leaders on their block who step up, who take time to sweep in front of their house, and even a little bit further down the street, even though they don't own the property, who watch the kid walking home from school and ask them how their day is, ask them what kind of grades they're getting. The tenant leader in my building, when I lived in some projects, who on Valentine's Day or St. Patrick's Day, she ain't Irish, but yet she's collecting money from all the residents to in the basement of the building to have a St. Patrick's Day party for a bunch of black children. This is the spirit of America. You know, this same tenant leader, I'll never forget, her son was murdered in the building in which we live. And I remember saying to her, why would you stay here after your son, who served in the American military, no less, and came home and was savagely murdered? And she folds her arms and looks at me with a toughness, and she says, why am I still here in brick towers, these high-rise projects? And I said, yeah, why are you still here? And she says firmly, because I'm in charge of Homeland Security. Now here's a woman that gets it. It's not about the president, it's not about the congressperson, it's about me. This is my country. I'm gonna fight for it. I'm going to remake it in the image of our ancestors. I'm going to show that love will prevail over ignorance, over bigotry, over division, that I will unify our country through my spirit, through my blood. And if everybody stopped talking and started focusing on doing something more than I did yesterday in order to change tomorrow, then we're going to have the America of our dreams.
We remember the Kerner Report for its searing conclusion that our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. African Americans at the time were fast becoming concentrated and isolated in metropolitan ghettos. And the Kerner Commission said that by 1985, without new policies, our cities would have black majorities ringed with largely all-white suburbs. The commissioners acknowledged that government policies like urban gentrification and the construction of huge high-rise projects had helped to blight stable black communities. So they offered some specific and practical remedies, new jobs, affordable housing, and new steps to confront the destructive ghetto environment. But following the civil rights movement of the mid-60s, the peaceful marches and demonstrations, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the riots triggered a mounting white backlash. LBJ's escalation of the war in Vietnam added fuel to the fires. The Kerner report was published on March 1st, 1968. Hardly 5 weeks later, on the 4th of April, 40 years ago next week, Martin Luther King was assassinated. Flames again engulfed dozens of cities, and the possibility of large-scale change perished in the blood, ashes, and racist toxins. The president had told the Kerner Commission, "Let your search be free as best you can. Find the truth and express it in your report." They did, but the truth was not enough. The country lost the will for it. Cory Booker wasn't even born when this report appeared. My generation read and shelved it. His must now write the next chapter. That's it for the Journal. See you next week. I'm Bill Moyers.